So we are going live. So good afternoon to all. I am Syed Hassan Khan, Assistant Professor, Department of Law, University of Chittagong. Welcome you all to this ADR discussion. This is Season 2, Episode 1. And this ADR discussion is being organized by Center for International Alternative Dispute Resolution, CIAdr. And so let's have some introduction about the CIAdr. CIAdr is a global center of calibers for the profession and practice of alternative dispute resolution, ADR. It is the first and only online dispute resolution, ODR, institute in South Asia, provides very natural, reliable, and cost-efficient dispute resolution services since 2018. CIAdr is now renowned for its very cost-effective, fast-rating dispute resolution and very experienced independent arbitrators and mediators in South Asia. So thank you, CIAdr, for providing this platform of today's discussion. The title of today's discussion is Domestic Violence and its Conflict Resolution in South Asia. And we have the pleasure of gracious presence of three esteemed academicians as invited panel speakers of today's discussion. We have among us Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir. He is a very distinguished professor in law in University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. He served very dynamically National Human Rights Commission of Bangladesh as chairman, and he is also associated with as a chief advisor, Center for International Alternative Dispute Resolution, CIAdr. As a panel speaker, we have among us Professor Dr. Salvin, Professor of Peace and Conflict Studies, University of Sikkim, Gangtok. And we have the pleasure of having with us Professor Dr. Nasrullah Mustafa. He is a professor in law, Avid Collage, Maldives. We all know that domestic violence is one of the pervasive forms of the violence against women across the globe. It is also interchangeably termed as the spousal violence or marital abuse. Domestic violence is a global issue and prevails in every cluster of the society, whether rich or poor, literate or illiterate, developed or underdeveloped. And the victims of domestic violence come across all socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds, irrespective of religious, linguistic, ethnic, or any other orientation. In South Asia, the context is more complicated. The incidents of domestic violence here are most commonly expressed in terms of family matters or personal or even private matters, and are mostly left unreported and unaddressed by the existing laws. So in this context, we feel the urge to compare and contrast the distinct dimensions of domestic violence, the available legal recourses, and the possible alternatives for the conflict resolution of matrimonial abuses from a South Asian perspective. And so here we are. Now it's time to hear from our honorable panel speakers. And we like to start with Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir. He is a professor in law, University of Dhaka, and served as chairman, National Human Rights Commission of Bangladesh. Sir, welcome to today's discussion. Sir, you have been a vanguard in, sir, can you please unmute your microphone kindly?
Thank you, Mr. Syed Hassan, for your kind words and for your words of introduction.
Sir,
I'd be rather brief in my presentation.
Okay.
Let me have this privilege of being the co-panelists with two distinguished speakers from India and from the Maldives. I'm sure that you are going to learn a lot from them and from their experience. However, let me begin with a lighter note, almost anecdotal, I would say. You know, I was teaching in one of my classes when I was teaching human rights to the students at the University of Dhaka. So, uh, we saw that, well, initially, as I was discussing the emergence of the concept of human rights and how it became universal concept. So, as making reference to different historical milestones of the development of the concept of human rights, and referred that when it was the rights of man, and generally how man included woman, and so on and so forth. And subsequently, that after the Second World War and in the UN Charter, we use the terminology human rights. So this is how we have been able to accommodate all the human beings in the society under one umbrella. Uh, but then human. So there had been some discussion and debate that why human. So when it's human, so again it's man who is being emphasized and not women. So there was some kind of debate and dispute, And I remember that Professor Upendra Bakshi, I think the one of the most reputed professors of our times. So Upendra Bakshi, something sarcastically, he once mentioned, "Okay, fine, let me coin a new word then. Instead of human, let's use hue person." So that was, I think, sarcastically he just mentioned, by the by, hue person rights. So I was talking to my students that, you see, so how this has become, a gender-wise acceptable option, that we now you can talk about hue person rights. Then one backbencher student in my class, so he raised his hand and he asked me, "Sir, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Obviously you can." So he asked me, "Sir, Hugh person, again, sir, it's son. Where is Hugh daughter?" So it's again male chauvinism and patriarchy reflected even in the language that we're using in human rights. I often make this anecdotal reference, not only to show the the intellectual, I think, sophistication of the students of Dhaka, of my students, but also to show that this is how patriarchy is ingrained into our thought process. And when we talk about human rights, and we talk about domestic violence, then the first thing that we need to refer to is the patriarchy. In South Asia, our society is patriarchal, and in a patriarchal society, the patriarchy is patria potestas, and therefore it's the patriarch who commands, who controls things, and not only controls economically but also controls the life of the members of the family. This is where patriarchy enters into the picture, and from this perspective we need to analyze the rights of women. And as we talk about the rights of women in our societies, obviously, domestic violence is one of the area we cannot ignore and avoid. But when you talk about domestic violence, let me just refer to one of the um, quotes by greatest philosopher of all times, Karl Marx. Karl Marx once opined that if you want to know about the status of civilization that a society has attained, just look at the status of women in that particular society. And that will tell you that whether it is a civilized society or not. So when we look at our women, how they are placed in our life, both public life and private life, only that will indicate that whether we have given enough space and rights and dignity to our women, the almost half the population of our societies. And then we can talk about whether there had been any achievements in respect of human rights of women. But once again, even when in the Vienna Convention, Vienna Conference in 1993, when it was referred to that women rights are human rights, then I'm pretty sure that Dr. Salvin and Professor Nasrullah will agree with me that when we talk that women rights are human rights, knowing fully well that human rights are universal, knowing fully well that human rights are inherent, knowing fully well that human rights are inalienable, knowing fully well that human rights are indivisible, but we need to segregate and talk about women rights as human rights. That only shows the critical situation of women rights in our societies, not only in South Asia, but all over the globe. So this brings us to the topic that what is the situation and the status of women in our societies? And we talk about, violence committed, the atrocities, the infringement of rights of women folk in our societies. You know, uh, I always say that uh, if I am asked to define human rights, then I always say that, whatever is necessary and whatever protects and promotes the dignity of a person, that is human right. And whatever infringes on the dignity of a human person, that is a violation of human right. So from this very simple analysis, that it is the essence of human rights is human dignity. So we have to see that whether this dignity is enjoyed by women in our societies or not. From the very illustrious decisions by the Indian Supreme Court and a number of decisions emanating from Justice Bhagavati, from Justice Krishna Iyer, that right to life not necessarily means to lead a life of an animal, but right to life always means right to live with human dignity. So in the present world, the dignity encompasses all the other freedoms and liberties that we talk about, that we know about, that we demand from our, the state, from the governance system. We expect that all those rights, liberties, and freedoms would be ensured for the citizens. Only that ensures the dignity of a citizen, of a human being in the present world. However, when we talk about human rights or women rights in Bangladesh, for example, and specifically talk about violence against women, then we have to segregate into two parts. Violence in the forms of public violence and forms of private or domestic violence. Two segregated areas. But here today, the organizers have asked us to focus only on domestic violence. But at the same time, let me just refer that the forms of public violence that we come across in our societies, whether this is Sri Lanka or Pakistan or India or Bangladesh, it's all the same. Only probably the degree varies. And we have seen in the sphere of public violence, we find the forms like rape, though it might happen also in the private sphere, in the domestic sphere, workplace violence, trafficking in persons, acid violence, victimization by fatwa. Well, this is something which is, I think, peculiar in Bangladesh and Pakistan, to a lesser extent probably in India, but this is something which is a problem also. Victimization by fatwa, if teasing, child abuse. So all these are the forms of violence in the public sphere. And what is very interesting is when you talk about Bangladesh, you see the supreme law of the land, the constitution, it guarantees equality of all the citizens without any discrimination with regard to even sex and gender. So if we take this fundamental postulate of the constitution, the principle of non-discrimination, you'd be appalled to find that the principle of non-discrimination and equality, it applies only in the public sphere, not in the private sphere, not in your family matters. And this is what leaves a woman totally helpless in private sphere. One of the reasons I would say that domestic violence at times takes very serious forms and magnitude in our societies. So, what are these forms in the domestic sphere, in the private sphere? It is torture by husband, often, wife beating, repression and torture, torture by in-laws, torture by the family, dowry related violence. You know, we have sort of criminalized taking of dowry, but that did not prevent it from real life situations. It is practiced, and even today we find that these demands for dowry leads to severe forms of violence against women, against wives, even to the extent of leading to the death of wives and women in the families. Threat to reproductive health, that's another form of violence. Marital rape, marital rape, it is not as easily to be qualified and defined in our societies as in Europe and America today. But it is quite, I think, heartening to notice that of late, even our judiciary is coming up with, one or two decisions where they're referring to that there can be situations of marital rape in a country like Bangladesh as well. But, being overwhelmingly a very I think religious society, and predominantly the population being adherent of the Islam. So marital rape is something very difficult to I think qualify and introduce in the circumstances of Islam being practiced as the fundamental main religion in the society. Then obviously there is also adultery, which is also violence, because adultery committed by the husbands is a I think psychological impact of that upon wives is so grave that it leads to the infringement of dignity of the person and therefore a violation of human rights. So there are so many different forms of domestic violence in the country as we come across today. And I remember while I was the chair of the National Human Rights Commission, that when you talk about intra-citizen disputes coming to the Human Rights Commission, then among these the private disputes, the overwhelming majority of disputes related to domestic violence. And this is where the National Human Rights Commission had to enter, had to intervene, and sometimes apply modes of ADR for purposes of resolution of the disputes. But you know that when violence takes a very serious and acute form, then becomes beyond the jurisdiction of the National Human Rights Commission to address those issues. But when it is within the I think an ambit of that not yet severe damage has been done to the victims, that offense or crime, the magnitude as that is still not the severe and serious. To that extent, the National Human Rights Commission was able to address the issues and bring some relief to the victims through the mechanism of ADR, which is very much within the jurisdiction of the NHRC. You know, the thing is that over the years we have the state has taken a number of great initiatives to address the issue of domestic violence. And as a matter of fact, the civil society in Bangladesh had been very vibrant until very recent times. And activism of the civil society, their legal awareness program, their women's empowerment programs and initiatives, and economic empowerment of women through the microcredit programs and others, they played a very significant role in ameliorating the situation of women, addressing the root causes of domestic violence. Because with economic empowerment of women, the the patriarchy in the society, they lose the strength of their voice, and sometimes they have to bow down and reconcile with the realities of life. So male chauvinism then is compelled to bow down to the economic realities of the society. And that brings us to the understanding and realization that it is only through empowerment of women that ultimately the domestic violence can be eradicated, can be addressed very effectively. We have a plethora of legislative initiatives and laws addressing domestic violence in the country. We have not only substantive but procedural laws also, so that these the all the issues relating to domestic violence can be addressed within the shortest possible period of time. But then again, the reality is that despite these legislative innovations, life has shown that not all these lead to the expected and desired results. And women continue to face the brunt, and the anxieties and agonies of women continue as victims of different kinds of violence in our society, in our families. Uh, but you know, uh, just one or two words that even as women had been at the receiving in the sense that they have been the mostly the victims of domestic violence, the situation has markedly it has deteriorated and worsened during this pandemic. I think this is something that needs to be further explored and researched. But as we see that domestic violence during the pandemic, during this COVID-19 period, has tremendously increased in Bangladesh. The Center for Genocide Studies of the University of Dhaka, it comes up with a monthly bulletin where it shows and depicts that how COVID is, impacting our societal life, and what kinds of violence and violations of human rights are taking place within this lockdown period and in a limited sort of movement period. And the picture is quite appalling. All kinds of domestic violence, including, the torture of women, torture of wives, tremendously increased during this pandemic. So that is something that worries. That is something that needs to be probably looked into very seriously by the authorities. However, I think that the Center for Alternative Dispute Resolution, uh, the initiative that it has taken today to address this issue and bring to light the situation and see us ourselves in the mirror of South Asia to compare with India and the Maldives. I think that gives us a very good opportunity to assess ourselves, to see ourselves in the mirror, and to see that what we can learn from other countries, from their good practices, which can be replicated, and then it can be used for the benefit of the women folk, for women rights, for their empowerment, for resolution of disputes, and addressing the issues relating to domestic violence in a country like Bangladesh. So, with these few words, probably I would say adieu, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of sharing some of my thoughts with these very distinguished co-panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir. You have been a vanguard in protecting human rights in Bangladesh for a prolonged period of time. We have seen that, witnessed that. And you have very precisely pointed out and analyzed the socio-cultural dimensions of domestic violence. Sir, if you allow me, I would like to supplement a few questions more with your discussion. So we have already come to know that we have distinct penal laws to counter the violence on any person, irrespective of gender, in Bangladesh. So what was the rationale to enact a special legislation, that is the Domestic Violence Protection and Prevention Act 2010, that especially deals with the domestic violence occurrences in Bangladesh? So what was the rationale and philosophy behind the enactment of this legislation?
Well, if you want an answer from me, you see,
Yes.
one of the reasons that special legislations are enacted, it in order to um, emphasize the problem that probably bothers the nation, to bring it to the forefront, and to see that these are taken special care of by the law enforcement agencies and by the society and the governance units, so that we can address those issues immediately and reap the benefits of this focused concentration on a few areas of human rights violations, and that is domestic violence. You see, let me, since you asked this question, let me just bring it, relate it to the amendment that was made to the legislation. And that for rape, when it was the life imprisonment, so that now has been, through this amendment, enhanced to death penalty. Now, we know that death penalty itself is something which is very debatable issue in the whole of world today. It has both, the pros and cons. You have merits and demerits, and we can also have a debate that whether death penalty should be there in the legal system in a civilized modern day world or not. But keeping that debate aside, the purpose that death penalty was introduced, on a very short notice, was merely to emphasize the point that these are the violations which cannot be tolerated by the state any longer. And the state wanted to set a standard and let it be known to the whole of the citizens that this is what is the policy of the state right now. So we are not going to tolerate anything, any kind of violence. And in a situation of pandemic, when it was really harming and hurting the feeling of the whole population, I think, despite other philosophical and jurisprudential debate on death penalty, this was something which was welcomed by the whole of the nation and the people at large. So you see, the reason is not that tomorrow, just with introduction of a death penalty, or everything is going to change, and there is not going to be happen any rape or you see in the country. No, it's not like that. But the message that is conveyed through this enactment says that the state is taking this very seriously, and therefore beware. And that's what the deterrent effect of any legislation. It has to be conveyed very strongly, and it was done so.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us. Actually, the domestic violence is unlike any other offenses in Bangladesh, particularly in Bangladeshi legal system. As the title of our legislation suggests, this is domestic violence protection and prevention. So that's why it is described not as a punitive law, but a preventive law. Thank you, sir, Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman, sir, for enlightening us and for your valuable insights. Now I am moving to Professor Dr. Salvin. He is a professor of Peace and Conflict Studies, University of Sikkim, Gangtok. Welcome, sir. Sir, can you please share your insights on how India deals with domestic violence cases, and what are the existing systems in your country to resolve such conflict, so that we can have a comparative analysis of domestic violence? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Said. I hope that I am audible to you all. And let me, at the outset, extend my gratitude to CIAdr, and also my happiness to share the dais with the stalwarts like Professor Rahman and Professor Mustafa. I think Professor Rahman has already laid out the foundations of domestic rights. Regarding your question, when you come to India, I think we have here a law that deals directly with domestic violence. But let me try to give some kind of understanding regarding domestic violence conceptually in terms of the generic term of violence against women in comparison to domestic violence. So violence against women is a manifestation of historically unequal power relations that exist, and there is a domination tendency by the men, or the discrimination against women by men, and that discrimination and domination prevent exercising the freedom of women, the choices of the women as a human being, which Professor Rahman already explained here from human rights perspective. So domestic violence, when you compare with this violence against women, which is a very generic term, domestic violence, relatives who are supposed to protect the women who is equated with nature. So domestic violence is physical, sexual, or psychological abuse directed towards one spouse, partner, or other family members within the household. That is what it has become most deplorable case, domestic violence. So domestic violence, a family member is the culprit behind the domestic violence. Your partner, your ex-partner, they try to physically or psychologically dominate or harm the other partner. So when we look at South Asia, the most important thing that we need to say is that in terms of domestic violence, South Asia is the highest in conducting or in subjugating women in domestic violence. So this intimate partner violence or sexual violence against women is the major public health problems and violations of women's human rights, which already Professor has enlightened here. So domestic violence is violent victimization of women within the boundaries of family, usually by men. But earlier I told domestic violence does not mean that it should be done by men over women. It can be done by women over men also. But if you look at the data, it is mostly happening from men to women. So domestic violence against women can be any act or conduct which has potential to injure or hurt women physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and also spiritually. And this all is done by the relatives. So Sedu was asking me, what are the acts that are available in India to deal with this issue? The Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. This is the law that tried to prevent and contain domestic violence in India. And domestic violence, I already stated that domestic violence does not mean that it should be only directed towards women. But we need to understand one fact. The so-called developed country like United States of America reported that 85% of women are cases of intimate partner violence, compared to 3% of the violent crime experienced by men. So domestic violence in Indian context also mostly refers to violence against women. So when we look at various forms of domestic violence, there are physical abuse, pushing, leaving, slapping, kicking, choking, all the kinds of force that are behind used for physical abuse. Or sexual abuse. Sexual abuse, we need to understand that it is not only simply use, but also denying and preventing this natural right. Because Professor Rahman already told that when you go out of your institution called marriage to enjoy your pleasure by yourself, through the process called adultery, you are also denying her right to enjoy her natural rights. And also psychological abuse, intimidation, persecution, threats of the talak, or threats of what is called impurity. You are a widow, you are no, honor killing. All these kind of psychological abuse also constitute domestic violence. In the contemporary context, women is a human being. She has got human dignity. She has got right to exercise her power, especially in economy. When you deny funds to her, it is an economic abuse. Access to proper health, the choice to go and work, all these are economic abuses. Or the emotional abuse, shouting, insulting, humiliation. Or we can also classify domestic violence, especially focusing on aged women. That is called gerontological aspect of dealing with aged women or girl child. Especially they face lot of problems if they have mother died or stepfather, or unmarried girls certain times face. All these things are there. So when we look at the crime against women in India, the NCRB report, National Crime Record Bureau report 2018, states that cruelty by husband or his relatives constitute 31% or almost 32% of crime against women. Assault on women with intent to outrage her modesty, it is around 27%. Kidnapping and abduction of women, 22%. Rape, 10% of the crime against women is constituted by. So, some of the North Indian states, especially Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh, even in Northeast states like Assam, etc., is ranking very high, especially committing crime against women in India. Professor already told that in the context of COVID, domestic violence has increased. I think you have heard reports from large number of divorces, domestic violence, etc., reporting from China, America, etc. Even in India, National Commission for Women India also has reported there is a sharp spurt in cases of domestic violence in India during lockdown. Delhi High Court has asked center to effectively implement provisions of the Domestic Violence Act during the lockdown, responding to the petition filed by All India Council of Human Rights, Liberties and Social Justice, which is an NGO. But when we look at what are the major factors that constitute domestic violence, we all become violent. Professor told we are male chauvinistic, we become aggressive, especially men, etc. But the primary platform for all these is laid down by our cultures, our religion, our economic and political conditions set by the precedents for initiating and perpetuating domestic violence by men. But ultimately, committing an act of violence is a choice that individual makes. So out of the range of options that you have available. So deep, already Professor Rahman has explained the deeply rooted patriarchal and long preference for male child is a kind of considered as a boon to the family across South Asia. So there is a high increasing amount of abortions if there is a female fetus. Through ultrasound or advanced technology, you come to know that you are pregnant in the earliest stage of pregnancy, that you are bearing a female baby. And abandonment of girl child, less importance to education for girl child, early marriage or child marriage, all these factors increases susceptibility to domestic violence. So some of the cultures in South Asia, if a mother pregnant with a female child can be no, they can be rejected or neglected of care, support, nutrition, emotional and psychological abuse. There is a large amount of dishonor associated with impurity, widowhood, barren women, terminated or unintended pregnancies, etc., which sorry, factors domestic violence. Now, I told you that certain data regarding domestic violence that is happening in South Asia, especially in India, but domestic violence has got a serious implication at economical, social, and health level, not only for women but also for children and the family and the society. So it is a serious problem that need to be in India. National Family Health Survey states that 30% of the Indian women have been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused by their husbands at some point in their lives. But I don't think it is 30%. I think it is much higher than 30% in the Indian context. Why I tell you is that reporting about domestic violence is very less in South Asia. It is an act of resistance and assertion of female agency when she reports that she is undergoing domestic violence. The extent and the type of support that a survivor of a violence receives, including the practical assistance and dealing with emotions, impacts, coping with the recovery from trauma, or responses from family, friends, and neighbors, all these can influence the decision of reporting domestic violence to institutional agencies. Reporting to formal sources or formal agencies implies that the institutional climate facilitates the domestic violence as a social problem rather than being buried in the private recesses of the home. So, dear friends, this 30% that is reported is highly contestable. And also, India lacks a mandatory reporting mechanism such as routine screening and reporting by hospitals when women visit with suspicious injuries. There are laws. Section 498 of India's Penal Code, certain times under the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, allow the earlier to get a non-bailable arrest by the partner who committed that crime. But Supreme Court recently has passed a verdict in 2017 that visible signs of injuries are necessary for an arrest of the partner. And in that verdict, I think they have limited the crime into only physical abuses. Instances of emotional abuse, there may be no physical injuries, and instances of marital rape or other sexual violence, women may feel uncomfortable revealing them to the police officer or the concerned officers. And also, this reporting of domestic violence depends on the support she receives from her husband. may be shaped or fettered by the poverty, the patriarchal norms, the cultural legitimization of violence, and the family structure in which it takes place. Many of the times, women think their families would be able to bear their burden. Do not think. Especially because typically they had children that stopped them from sharing their ordeal to any other agencies. So this is often a pragmatic assessment, given the precarious economic and social assistance of their natal families. The spatial configurations of an urban informal settlement are such that woman who is being physically abused publicly will be rescued, even if only temporarily, by her neighbors. This is a very common tendency. Just because the community feels empathy for women, but also because violence of this nature is seen as a form of public nuisance, and many families would prefer a peaceful neighborhood. Because of that, certain times women get a lot of support from the neighborhood. And I don't know whether you have heard recently their hands like this, so that they demand support, and they are undergoing domestic violence because they cannot state it or report it. And also this community support depends on subjective and ad hoc assessment of the whether victim is worthy of support. For example, the worthiness of victim depends on whether she was a good mother, good wife, good daughter-in-law. All these things are there. And also certain times the loyalties often loyalties were also split along regional and caste lines, as well as whether the families were tenants or business families and all those things. So local women whose families owned their homes had most supportive system, while migrant tenant women had least support. This is very important factor because nobody go and make a response when a woman undergo certain, especially if she is a refugee, if she is a migrant woman, etc. Informal reporting of domestic violence need to be strengthened. Institutional mechanism for help seeking need to be strengthened. The backdrop of victims on precarious assistance and the assistance of patriarchal structures, practices, and discourses, etc., need to be addressed. While approaching the police and other formal agencies of governance may be forbidding for several women experiencing domestic violence, the role of intermediary civil society organization need to be explored, that you can connect with other units such as support, etc. I want to just highlight two successful civil society organizations. One is, of course, from Bangladesh. It is called multi-sectoral model of one-stop crisis centers and there is another one in India, that is Dilasa in Mumbai, that is operating. So if you look at ADR, I'm not a legal person. I'm coming from Peace and Conflict. Already the moderator has. So the effective response to domestic violence must be multi-sectoral, addressing the immediate practical needs of women experiencing abuse, providing long-term follow-up, assistance, and focusing on changing those cultural norms, attitudes, of, and even encourage violence against women and undermine women's enjoyment of their full human rights and freedoms, which Professor Rahman has very categorically, explicitly explained in his presentation. May I tell you one nuance that we need to focus? Health sector has got a unique potential to deal with violence against women, particularly through reproductive health services, which most women will access at some point in their lives. However, this potential is far from being realized. few doctors, nurses, or other health personnel have the awareness and the training of identity to identify violence as the underlying cause of women's health problems, this could make a lot of. So health sector can play a vital role in preventing violence against women and identify abuse at early stage, provide victims with the necessary treatment and referring women to appropriate care, all those things. So dear friends, I just conclude by stating one initiative that has been started by World Health Organization on preventing violence against women. This is known as respect. See, there are 7 strategies to initiated by what is called World Health Organization. The respect, the R stands for strengthening relationship skills, especially among male and female. The E stands for ensured, like there are many services, insurance or health services, etc. And the P stands for poverty reduced, and E stands for environments made safe, especially the home, the workplace, and the C stands for child and adolescent abuse prevented, and the last T stands for transformed attitude, beliefs and norms that exist in culture, religion and institutions, etc. So let us hope for a future that is where both our women and men enjoy human rights equally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Salvin. And it was very enriching and comprehensive discussion on domestic violence issues from Indian perspective. Well, you have described that the psychological abuse or psychological torture is one of the form of. Can you hear me, please? Dr. Salvin, am I audible?
Can you repeat? I can't hear.
Oh. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, so Dr. Salvin, you have nicely explained that psychological abuse is one of the prime forms of domestic violence. And in Bangladesh, the Domestic Violence Protection and Prevention Act 2010, that is a special legislation dealing with domestic violence in Bangladesh. In Section 3, it recognized the psychological abuse as a form of domestic violence for the very first time in the legal history of Bangladesh. So in that sense, this law is a very unique law for Bangladesh. So my question is to you, from your discussion, we have come to know that domestic violence has a deep connection with the mental health of the conjugal partners. And in most often, we see it results in clinical depression or the post-traumatic disorder of the victims. So my question to you is, can clinical psychology and law play a synchronizing role here? What do you think?
I think that is one of the area where I think this ADR need to be focused from going beyond the conventional ADR system to a new experimental ADR in expanding and resolving these issues through health institutions, especially psychological institutions and health institutions, by empowering skills and competencies to identify, because women, all the women go to hospital. So I think we need to explore this, especially in South Asia. We need to explore this, that how a women need to be motivated by health professionals to come out, to encourage how it happened. You understand? So that reporting is very important. Then only she can exercise her agency as a human being and exercise her rights, exercise her choices so that her freedom is fully potentially available, whatever freedom that is available for her in the through constitution, through society and family, etc. Many of the times women doesn't report. This is a very serious and psychological emotion. For example, I will tell you some of the new ways of dealing women, domestic violence that women being faced is unimaginable. The kind of you do sets in front of your wife and families, you victimize your children to punish your wife. All these kind of psychological mechanisms are adopted by certain kind of people, especially men. So a psychological empowerment is very necessary to overcome the perpetual violence that is being enforced on women is necessary. That is what my personal opinion. And this institutional process also need to be utilized for not only for reporting but also for empowering and encouraging to act against domestic violence across South Asia. South Asia is ashamed of this domestic violence. It's a kind of pandemic in across South Asian countries. You understand? So there is no difference. I don't, because I think there is no difference between Bangladesh and India in this context. Thank you so much.
Yes, precisely. Thank you, Dr. Salvin, for your very enriching and insights. We have among us Professor Dr. Nasrullah Mustafa. For a very long period of time, he is connected here. He is a professor in law, Avid Collage, Maldives. Welcome, sir. Sir,
yeah, welcome.
So Dr. Nasrullah, through the discussion we have already met so far, we got familiar with the Bangladeshi and Indian context of resolving domestic violence and the different dimensions of it. Do you find any contrast with Maldives and India and Bangladesh? How Maldives resolved the domestic violence issues?
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Yes,
I think you can hear me, right? My voice. Yeah. So before going to that point, let's discuss about the reality of domestic violence in Maldives, right? So in that sense, I will first look at the term itself, domestic violence, that has been actually discussed widely in different platforms in Maldives, right? Domestic violence means different, it is ambiguous. It differs in its meaning in different legal jurisdictions. The Domestic Violence Prevention Act, that is DVPA 2012 in Maldives, defines domestic violence as act by a perpetrator where such conduct harms or may cause imminent harm to the safety, health, or well-being of the victims, provided that the victims and the perpetrator are in a domestic relationship, right? How important this is, actually, both professors have explained in detail. So this is what is mentioned about domestic violence in the Domestic Violence Prevention Act 2012. That is exactly the article number 4 states like that. So after that, as both the professors have been speaking about violence against women, here in Maldives also we speak a lot about the violence against women, because we don't actually forget about the kids, and we don't forget about the male partner also, but still the most visible partner who is getting affected by this is the female partner. We are also actually very much concerned about this. So violence against women is a common crime in many countries, where the crimes include several categories of various serious crimes, right? Such as murder, rape, as our professors have mentioned, physical assault, and less serious crimes that have psychological and physical impact on the victim and on our society as well. So the psychological part, how it is important, our professor just has explained about it. This actually, such physical assault with sometimes end up in beating and verbal insult also. So these things are there in Maldives. As the Maldives considers violence against women a source of great concern and requires immediate attention, and the latest statistics indicates that 1 out of 3 women, see how astonishing these actually statistics are. So it indicates 1 out of 3 women are exposed to violence in Maldives, which is actually a great number, whose ages ranges between 18 to 59. So see how dangerous it is. There are many reasons for the phenomenon, and one of its most important dimension is tolerance or intolerance. That is, the girl's tolerance of the perpetrator, which leads to the spread of violence. Actually, sometimes these actually violence, they don't report, as our both professors have mentioned. Even in their countries, they sometimes find hard to report to the concerned authorities. Because of that, even in Maldives, these things are getting more and more. In Maldives, the first ever comprehensive study on violence against women was carried out in 2007, which also revealed that 1 in 3 women between ages of 15 to 49 have some kind of physical or sexual abuse at some point in their lifetime. So this is actually done by Ministry of Gender and Family in 2007. This was the shocking finding from the this study. It's astonishing. Like in many other countries, the various forms of violence against women, right? Uh, the various forms of violence against women that are highly prevalent in Maldives have since been recognized as a national problem. Since then, the phrase 1 in 3 has become a powerful slogan for policy and practice change to improve the status of VAW. So this actually leads to uh, making of different laws. So many laws were enacted to reduce this domestic violence. So like Domestic Violence Prevention Act 2012 in the same year, right? And again, we have Domestic Violence Prevention Act that was passed in 2012, and it actually got a lot of say concern over this, because there has been this prevailing of the domestic violence in Maldives, right? So this is one law that has been made in order to prevent the domestic violence in Maldives. And again, even if the laws are there, and even if regulations are there, right, and we have legal precedents in Maldives, there are a lot of challenges in actually say preventing the domestic violence. Even the challenges, the police and the criminal justice system is also one of the greatest. Let's talk about some of the challenges. Right, challenges facing the criminal justice system include the challenges that are there for the police. Right, actually, reluctance of victims to provide support to the investigation, just because of the culture, just because of their behavior, how they are behaving, how their culture is. This also prevents them from reporting these sort of crimes to the concerned authorities. Actually, mainly because victims are afraid to leave the violent situation in fear of either retaliation or fear of losing children. The fact that society still sees VAW as a private matter and something that should not be talked about outside of the home makes women, who are most often than are not the victims of domestic violence, reluctant to seek help either from the police or relevant authorities. So because of this, they don't go to the police, or they don't go to the gender ministry, or the concerned authorities, right? So we have to get actually more accurate empirical data on prevalence rate, because this is done for women, and that is actually well known that it is only the number of reports that are being counted. How about the others, as our doctor from India have mentioned? They are not reporting. The number will be very much higher than this, because we know that because of their prevailing culture, because of their belief, because of many factors, they are not actually reporting to the concerned authorities. So there is an urgent need for robust primary research relevant to the current state of issues in Maldives concerning domestic violence. So the most commonly referred research in this area is this study of women's health and life experiences in 2007. So actually that also is not sufficient. So we need to collect more information regarding this. And then again, we have to go for an understanding of organizational knowledge and attitudes. Key criminal justice agencies such as the police, courts, and the correctional system can influence how policy is actually practiced. Acknowledging that these agencies may have low trust from the public, it is important to understand how different agencies actually contribute to resolving the abuse or re-victimizing the victim. Capacity building of these key agencies needs to be undertaken to ensure that policy is being practiced and it is actually being ineffective. Again, we have to improve legislative and regulatory framework so that we can actually deal with this sort of violence. The extent to which and how the existing legislative and regulatory framework facilitates, actually obstructs or limits desired results needed to be held more openly. And any revisions or amendments required must be brought as soon as possible, because this is not actually simple. So to protect the female, actually our society is different from other societies, in the sense that we don't have that much force. So male population is higher than female population. There is actually this problem more in our society. So when we this is only regarding females. So when we talk about actually violence against children also, it alarms, it gives alarming result to all of us. In recent years, the Maldives has strengthened its focus on protecting children and adolescents. The Maldives was among the first countries to sign and ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1991. This marked a national change in the way children were viewed and treated as human beings with a unique set of rights. Since then, the government has created special institutions such as the family and juvenile courts to better address legal issues facing young people, including children. They have also implemented interventions at the local and national levels, including a national child protection policy for educational settings. For years, the country has worked to improve the situation for children and have established a number of mechanisms for reporting and preventing protection concerns around the country. And also, regardless of these successes, however, in the Maldives, many children are still forced to grow up too fast. The country's wide geographic dispersion sets some families hundreds of miles from the capital, separating communities by a vast distance and at times a rough expanse of a sea. Because of this, some spend their childhood in remote island communities far from the system designed to protect them. Others grow up in one of the most densely populated cities in the world, the Maldivian capital, that is called Male. And some, especially the adolescents, migrate from small islands to large ones, hoping to attend a secondary school with more diverse classes. Each reality can place children at risk of exploitation, at times funneling them into drug abuse, and many crimes. So in Maldives, adults often use force against children in the home or classroom. Across the country, 15% of adolescents have been sexually abused at least once, with the rates among girls double that for rates among boys. In a close-knit island community, it can be incredibly difficult for a child to come forward about their experiences of abuse, especially in a context where such violence is often considered a family issue, as both our professors have mentioned. To be resolved in home. So it is a family issue. You have to resolve it home. So don't go out. Don't bother other concerned authorities. Just do it secretly. So this is what the people are thinking. In addition, nearly half of all children have experienced emotional or physical punishments. So this is actually really alarming. So in Male, when we talk about the capital city of Maldives, right, 10% of students are living without their parents. 10% of students are living without their parents. So this is adding to all these crimes happening in our society. According to the Ministry of Education, many of those studies, actually students are child migrants who arrived in the city at the age of 16 or 17 or more than that, seeking educational options unavailable in their islands, unavailable in their homes, unavailable in their own island. Only a fraction of schools in the Maldives provides all three options of a study: science, commerce, and arts. Now almost it's getting much better. It's getting much better at the secondary school level. So forcing adolescents to relocate if they want to continue learning. As a result, many children settle into new schools and new communities without any sort of supporting system. So when they come to a new environment and new people are there who are never bothered about them actually. So because of this, the abuse increases and other crimes also increases for them. Alone and under-supported, children can find themselves at the center of crime, gang violence, and drug abuse, the latter of which has increased dramatically in the recent years. To fill that gap and secure a sense of belonging, an increasing number of children in Male are joining gangs. This is a real story. So gangs do not only attract child migrants. The majority of children in conflict with the law have experienced physical, sexual, or emotional abuse in the past. Once entering such a cycle, it can be nearly impossible for children to escape from it. They have their ways to trap them. They will not leave the students go out of this cycle until they finish what they want. So highlighting the need for the comprehensive support system at the community and the national level. So we need a supporting system in order to prevent this violence going on in Maldives. So according to me, actually, there are so many things we need to do, right? There are research and there are ample evidences we need to gather, and we have to do some things. So we have to protect the children in their communities. For that, we have to have a very strong mechanism. Creating referral mechanisms for that is very necessary. Boosting knowledge at the local and national level, building awareness in the tourism industry, also engaging parents in the fight against violence, especially domestic violence. So these things can be done, right? And our country, we have actually ADR, which is actually growing very faster. The Maldivian constitution guarantees that the equality among the people, including persons with national origin, right, birth or status or native island, are entitled to the rights and freedom stipulated in the constitution. However, it is noted that the people who are living in the islands are not equally provided with the rights that has been mentioned in the constitution, right? Uh, that is well known. As stated in the section 23 Article number 3 of the Family Law Act 2000. People who are living in the islands are refrained from that right of getting to access to the conciliatory committee for family matters. Hence, the service is available in the capital city of Maldives, but in a minimal level. At the same time, the geographical challenges might be one other reason to deliver the service in a meaningful actually manner. So the different type of conflicts resolution existed at all. There are so many different types of resolution, dispute resolution that has been existing or at all times. In actually Solomon's wisdom and in the name of Pancharat in India before the advent of Christ by 500 years, Dr. Laju P. Thomas, actually I think the professors will be knowing him, has mentioned this in his research, dispute resolution in rural India. In short, this is another word for actually a dispute resolution, or alternative dispute resolution is another word for achieving justice in the shortest way, or the shortcut method for achieving justice. So it is there in Maldives, in India, in Bangladesh, and everywhere, but the methods, the techniques, and the approaches are different.
Thank you.
Yeah, just give me 1 minute. I remember the philosopher of that Kun Fu Chu, who lived in 500 BC, saying actually regarding the courts. But I think now the courts are very important for ADR, and actually under the circular number SC 2/2015 of Supreme Court, a dispute resolution division was built in the Civil Court on 15th February 2015. And under the Arbitration Act 10/2013, dispute resolution mechanism also was established, and it is getting much better nowadays. So to actually combat the domestic violence that is prevailing in Maldives, we have actually we have to strengthen the mechanisms that are there and bring up new mechanisms. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And before ending, I would love to add something. All right, that is actually I am maybe you have misunderstood. I am actually a PhD student since 2016, and I have finished my thesis. That is actually in the area Doctor of Philosophy in Judicial Sciences and Legislative Policy. I have been working in the law sector for about 10 years, and that's me. And I'm working in Avid College. I'm the former dean of faculty of law, and still I am in that faculty. That's me. So I just want to correct those mistakes that you have done. And I'm really privileged to be here with the eminent professors. Actually, I have achieved a lot of knowledge from them. Thank you very much, both the doctors, both the professors. I really appreciate your knowledge that you have given to me, and I will benefit out of it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dr. Nasrullah Mustafa, for your very enlightening discussion on domestic violence issues prevalent in Maldives perspective. Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir has rejoined to us. Sir, a particular question to you. Professor Dr. Salvin has stated that the definition of domestic violence must be gender neutral. But the Bangladeshi law, a special law that deals with the domestic violence, its section 3 defines domestic violence as physical, sexual, or psychological or economic abuse by any member of the family to any female member or child of the family. So if we go through the definition, it is evident that the male victims are excluded from the definition of domestic violence. So it is found by many as problematic. What's your view on this? Do you find any justification to redefine the definition of domestic violence?
Well, thank you very much for the question. But let me, for your information, just that right now, as we are debating, as we're talking, the Ministry of Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs has undertaken a project of revisiting all the laws in the country in force and find out all the discriminatory provisions, those which are either apparent or inherent in the legislation. And as a matter of fact, the Faculty of Law, University of Dhaka, has been entrusted with this responsibility. So the project is ongoing. And as you just mentioned, so the researchers have already identified very many provisions in different legislations whereby such discrimination is latent and inherent in the legislation itself. So you are absolutely right. So it has to be, as Dr. Salvin mentioned, well, it has to be gender neutral. And in order to make all this gender neutral, so we need to revisit our legislations, not only, that we inherited from the British Raj and from the neo-colonial Pakistani rule, but also the legislations that we enacted ourselves in independent Bangladesh in the initial years of our republic. So now that the state is much more gender neutral, the state is quite cautious about human rights, and human rights is the, I think, language of the modern civilization. Therefore, all these legislation need to be revisited, and necessary amendments and adjustments have to be made. Absolutely, there's no question about that.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you have rightly pointed out that we have the colonial quota structure that has now become obsolete, and it is engulfed with so many problems. So how the alternative dispute resolution mechanism can be a tool in ensuring justice, particularly in resolving the domestic conflicts? I would like to hear from Professor Dr. Mizan as well as the other distinguished guests. Professor Dr. Mizan, sir, can you please highlight on this issue? Yeah. How ADR can play a role?
I think my co-panelists are far more experienced than me to address this issue, but nonetheless, let me just tell you this much, that you see, in social relations, there cannot be total winners and total losers. Long time back, probably Mr. Said Hassan, I think when you were not even born, there is a very popular, I think, band group from Sweden, ABBA, A-B-B-A, ABBA. And ABBA had a very popular song, the winner takes it all. And when you go to the court of law to resolve a dispute, either you win or you lose, and the winner takes it all. But in social relations, you cannot have total winners and total losers. Social relations, the nature of relations are such. And that's the reason that why we emphasize that ADR has to be the mechanism for resolution of disputes today. How do you do it in case of domestic violence? Until and unless it transgresses the limit, and the transgression goes to be defined as a criminal offense, I think till that juncture, probably it can be resolved through different means of ADR. Let me share just my experience at the NHRC. When we had this kind of dowry related or other forms of cruelty to women, not amounting to severe criminal offenses, we used to call not only the victim or the survivor and the offender or the accused, but also I made it a point that the guardians of both the parties do appear and be present during the negotiations or the the discussions that we have had for resolution of the problem and the dispute. Invariably, when the parents of both the parties are present, or one of the parents are present, it becomes easier. And I found it much more easier to talk to the parents and then sit face to face. Then you divulge all your agonies and worries, your protests, your complaints, everything that you want. You want to say everything so that you can then lighten yourself up. And then you leave it to the guardians who are more experienced, who have lived their life. But you there, as the NHRC, I said that to see that nothing unlawful happens, that no extra burden is put on one particular side, or no psychological pressure is there on one side. So that much you ensure, but you engage all the parties, including the parents, in the process of discussions and negotiations, so that a acceptable resolution can be reached at a point of time. So I think, you see, it would all depend on the nature of the violence that has taken place, the nature of domestic violence. But as I mentioned, that if it does not cross a particular limit whereby it amounts to a serious criminal offense, till that point, I think obviously it can be negotiated, mitigated, and we can reach a consensus and an amicable settlement of the dispute.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dr. Salvin has rejoined. Sir, would you like to put any of your insights on this issue, the role of ADR in resolving matrimonial conflicts from the Indian perspective?
My perspective, my understanding, I completely agree with Professor Rahman. He's a very well experienced and wide spectrums and horizons he has seen more than us. So, but my understanding or addition to ADR would be this, that psychological empowerment of both women and men are very necessary to mitigate and resolve domestic violence. Why we become violent in dealing with many issues of our partner? Because of our psychological deficiency to deal with issues in an emotional or sentimental perspective. So that need to be. And also, more importantly, see, we are in a transition period. Citizenship is not only limited to men now. Women are also enjoying and educating and coming to know about more rights about how to enjoy life, etc. So they also could play a vital role in, for example, I don't know, I have already stated that in India there was a non-bailable offense if there was any man committed domestic violence. But whereas it has been observed by Supreme Court of India that many of the cases it has been misused by educated women in India, so they have withdrawn that. But the really people, those who are really victims of domestic violence, they never come forward, they never report it. So in that context, I think emotional strengthening of the victim as well as the aggressor also is need to be emotionally boosted. Then only he can become more and more balanced and in terms of actions and deeds. This is very much important in the emerging context. So ADR need to be emerging context. And also the social media is going to have a greater role in our life. We are exercising our liberal individualism and narrow downing our space into the mobile and Facebook and social media, etc. So this also can have certain kind of repercussions and implications to the ADR system. So we need to broaden and strengthen and bring necessary changes in the ADR system. That is what I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salvin. There are some questions.
Said, just a minute, Said.
Yes.
You know what Dr. Salvin just mentioned. I think he made a very important point that, and Dr. Nasrullah also mentioned it in his presentation, that people do not come up. The victims of violence, they do not come forward and with grievances to let other people know. So I think it's not only the duty of the civil society organizations, but also an organization like yourself, like your center, to what do we call, to go for the campaign like break the silence. The silence must be broken. So break the silence. This has to be the slogan. So until and unless they break the silence, you and me, we're not going to know about the situation, what is happening there inside the family, within the four walls. So the silence has to be broken. Voice must be heard. They must be taken into account. And organizations like yourself, you have to come forward to mitigate those grievances, hear the voices, and be the voice of those who are unheard and who have been unheard for so long.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Salvin and Professor Dr. Mizanur Rahman, sir. You have nicely pointed out that it is not only the duty of the state. There are some other stakeholders that should come forward to resolve these issues. And in this connection, I would like to know from Dr. Nasrullah, do the non-government organizations, NGOs, and development agencies have a role to play in intervening and resolving family conflicts? What is your national experience in Maldives, if you like to share?
Well, actually, we have actually three methods of dealing with this ADR, right? That is negotiation and arbitration and mediation, right? And these actually, the other thing is as in Singapore, right? We have only one method, right? We have only one method, that is court-based method. So actually, non-governmental agencies, they don't have any role now, like in other countries. In Maldives, it is only court-based, which means the court will be actually appointing people for that, right? At the beginning, we had judges, right? The judge will be looking at the specific case, will not be actually present by himself for the this reconciliation process, right? This mediation process. There will be another judge. After that, actually, we actually they appointed counselors, and then after that, now we have mediators. So the government is playing the important role in it, because we don't have litigation mediation here in our country. We have only court-based mediation model in our country. So it is only the government. And mind you, even in criminal cases, what the PG, the Prosecutor General, is doing is actually, if it is as mentioned by Professor Mizanur Rahman, actually they are intervening, and if it is for the first time, right, the perpetrator, they will bring and see what is the extent of that crime, right? As our professor have just now mentioned, right? They will see to the extent of that crime and how severe it is, and then they will have an agreement with the perpetrator, and then they will actually leave him. So there in Maldives, it is like that until he commits another crime, right? Severe crime. So that is there in Maldives. And regarding the family matters, we have only one model that is being practiced there, and only the government is controlling. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. And it has been a very enriching discussion, though it is a very prolonged. It has been for a prolonged period of time. Thank you for your valuable time. Now we are at the end of our discussion. Lastly, we have already come to know that in Corona pandemic situation and the lockdown state, it is well reported throughout the different newspaper and the social media that the incidence of domestic violence got an alarming rise. In this situation, the courts are not fully functional, and there is very limited access to justice. In this context, today's webinar organizer, Center for International Alternative Dispute Resolution, CIAdr, is promoting the concept of a new thing, that is online dispute resolution. Apart from the alternative dispute resolution, they are promoting a new concept, online dispute resolution, that is otherwise called ODR, as an effective substitute for conventional court setup. So I would like to hear from all of you as a concluding remarks. What is your opinion about this ODR in resolving the domestic conflicts? Starting from Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir.
Well, probably I'd be very brief,
Yes, sir.
I'd only say that this pandemic has taught us various lessons. And one of the lessons is that we can even shrink the space, but we can extend our horizon. That is a very, I think, the wonderful lesson that we learned from the pandemic. So we don't need big, courthouses, the premises, but sitting in our own chambers, in my own room, in the virtual world and in the virtual court, in the virtual connections, we can go talk about, put our arguments, debate it, dispute it, and reach a consensus or a settlement. So this is very much possible. And I believe that in the future, even the virtual courts that in Bangladesh we have been running for quite some time, I don't think that this is going to end up with the vaccine coming. No, I believe that not only that we need to continue, but we need to popularize this virtual courtroom practice, because this enables the less empowered, the have-nots in the society, the poor and the marginalized, to also, have their voices heard in the in the legal arena, in the courts of law, and make some ways and means that justice be delivered to them also. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity. What you are mentioning as ODR, the online dispute resolution, I think this is the future of dispute resolution. This is one of the, I would say, the features of legal systems, a universal feature of legal system that we are going to realize. So it's better, and the sooner we realize it, the better. And I'm happy that you have identified it, you had already put it into practice, you have informed us about this, and you are going to resolve disputes online. And I can only wish you all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you, sir. Professor Dr. Nasrullah Mustafa, would you like to add something on this ODR?
Well, actually, ever since this pandemic has begun, Maldives actually introduced this online dispute resolution. And now I have noticed that most of the cases are going very fast. Before, it might take about years, but now it is very fast and it is very simple. And as Professor Mizanur Rahman has just mentioned, it should be the method of 21st century. Actually, we have to adapt it. And as Professor Mizanur Rahman has praised you, I actually congratulate you for starting this, actually, these sort of platforms, actually making easy for the people in their lifetime. Actually, ADR, actually, alternative dispute resolution, and you can play a tremendous role in actually putting up the difficulties of people's life in actually much easier way. So I think Maldives is practicing, and it will actually promote this, and will in future have this actually sort of dispute resolution as a part of their legal system. That's what I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nasrullah, Doctor. Professor Dr. Salvin, would you like to add your concluding remarks, please?
Of course, ODR is going to be a new normal now. It is not only ODR going to be a new normal, it is going to, as Professor Rahman told, that it is going to be a medium to break the silence. You understand? This is going to be a medium to mitigate and resolve the conflict in the future. And also, it is going to be a new normal in everyday life, because even liberal and neoliberal technologies are advancing far in every day. So I think online dispute resolution is going to be a new normal, and let us explore. And I congratulate the entire team of CIAdr for initiating a wonderful initiative in tandem with the time, in tandem with the advancement of technology, and also in taking care of the deficiencies of ADR, and a comprehensive dispute resolution mechanism that could be given to the society through online. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And also, I'm grateful to both the stalwarts, Professor Rahman. I have heard about him through my colleagues here from the law department, and Professor Mustafa. I'm grateful to meet you, and thank you so much for giving this opportunity for CIAdr. I have come to know about you people through when I visited Dhaka last year. I think Seher Rahman was there, and he was listening my talk on I think on political economy of India, China in the geopolitical context, that repercussions on Bangladesh. So thank you so much for giving me this great opportunity, and always full support for your ODR. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Salvin, Dr. Nasrullah Mustafa, and Dr. Mizanur Rahman sir. It has been a wonderful discussion on the different dimensions of domestic violence and the legal recourses available from a comparative analysis of Bangladesh, India, and Maldives. And it has been a personal privilege and honor for me to share screen with all of you, the esteemed academicians across the globe. And with this, I'm signing out. All the best wishes for you. Thank you very much for your time and effort. May Allah bless you. All the best wishes.